My name is Anna Vance, and I am 34 years old. For most of my adult life, I've been living a strange double existence. To the parents of my 20 kindergarten students, I am Miss Anna, the patient teacher who can handle a glitter spill and a temper tantrum with equal calm. To my family, I've always been just that, a teacher, a kind, slightly unambitious woman who chose a safe, small life. But on one weekend a month, and 2 weeks in the summer, I am Major Vance of the United States Army Reserves. I command a civil affairs company, a unit trained to be the bridge between military force and civilian populations in zones of conflict or disaster. My family always called it my little hobby, like I was collecting stamps or learning to knit. They never understood that the skills I learned in uniform, logistics, crisis management, leadership under fire, were the most real things about me. They certainly never imagined that one day my part-time job would make me the most powerful person in their lives, holding their survival and the survival of our entire city in my hands. It was the day the earth tore itself apart, and the woman they'd always dismissed had to teach them the ultimate lesson in what real power looks like. Before I dive into the story of how my CEO sister and city councilman brother had to stand at attention for the kindergarten teacher they mocked, I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel and connect us. And if you've ever felt underestimated by the people who should have believed in you the most, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more than you know. For all the new viewers here, make sure you subscribe to join this incredible community of people who understand that sometimes the quietest people have the most to say. The condescension wasn't a single event, it was the climate of my family, the air we breathed at every holiday and birthday. But the dinner a month before the world ended was particularly potent. We were at Aurelia, a restaurant where the plates were bigger than the portions and the bill required a strategic plan. It was my father's birthday, and as usual, it was a showcase for my siblings' success. My sister, Charlotte, who insisted everyone call her Charlie, was holding court. At 38, she was the CEO of a tech logistics firm, a company that moved data and assets around the globe with ruthless efficiency. Her hair was a sharp architectural bob, and she wore a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. The expansion into the Singapore market is a go, she announced, swirling a dark red wine in her glass. The board was hesitant, but I presented a risk analysis matrix so comprehensive it left them speechless. It's about anticipating every variable, Dad. You can't just hope for the best, you have to model for the worst. My father beamed, his pride puffing his chest out. That's my girl, a real shark. My brother David sat opposite me, looking polished and earnest in the way only a politician could. At 36, he was the youngest person ever elected to the city council, and he never let anyone forget it. He was already eyeing the mayor's office. We just passed the new preliminary budget for the city's emergency services, he said, cutting into his filet mignon. I managed to secure another $2 million for the EOC. Our new communication system is state-of-the-art. If there's ever a major event, a quake, a flood, we'll have a seamless top-down response. It's about infrastructure, Charlie. You build the systems, and the systems keep people safe. Impressive, Charlie conceded, a rare compliment from her. At least someone in this city is thinking about resilience. Then, as it always did, the spotlight turned to me. It wasn't a warm light, it was an interrogation lamp. And Anna, my mother said, her voice laced with that familiar gentle pity, how are your little ones? The question hung in the air, a fluffy, patronizing cloud. My world of finger painting and story time set against their backdrop of global markets and municipal power. They're great, I said, forcing a smile. We're learning about the life cycle of butterflies, and Marco finally learned to tie his own shoes. The silence that followed was deafening. Charlie took a sip of her wine, her eyes glossing over. David gave me a tight political smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's sweet, Charlie finally said, the word dripping with condescension. She turned to David. Speaking of hobbies, how's your weekend warrior thing going, Anna? Did you get to play in the mud recently? The jab was casual, effortless. They had always framed my military service this way. Not as a commitment, not as a duty, but as a peculiar pastime, like a grown woman playing with toy soldiers. I had long ago stopped trying to explain what civil affairs was. They heard army and pictured me crawling under barbed wire, not negotiating with village elders, or planning infrastructure restoration. It was a command post exercise, I said, my voice level. We were simulating a response to a hurricane scenario in the Gulf. It's mostly logistics and interagency coordination. David chuckled, shaking his head. War games. It's amazing they pay you for that. Look, Anna, it's great you have an interest, but you can't compare a simulation to the real thing. I'm dealing with actual unions, real budgets, concrete political realities. My emergency plan has to work in the real world, not just on a PowerPoint slide. My company's crisis plan is audited by a third party and stress-tested quarterly, Charlie added. Not to be outdone, we have redundant servers on 3 continents. If our headquarters in this city vanished tomorrow, we would be fully operational from Zurich in less than an hour. That's what real preparedness looks like. It's not about running around in the woods. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, the shame and frustration that was a staple of these gatherings. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to explain that my simulation involved coordinating the theoretical deployment of medical teams, water purification units, and security detachments for a population of 50,000 displaced people. I wanted to tell them that the variables in my PowerPoint slide were human lives. But I knew it was useless. To them, my reality was, by definition, smaller than theirs. My job was cute. My service was a hobby. The final humiliation came with the birthday cake. As we were finishing, my mother produced a small, elegant envelope and pushed it across the table toward me. This is a little something from all of us, dear. For your birthday next week. I opened it. Inside was a check for $500. We just thought you could use it, my father said, his tone avuncular and dismissive. Maybe buy some new supplies for your little classroom, or get yourself a nice spa day. You must get so tired running after all those kids. It wasn't a gift, it was a handout. It was a statement. You, with your small life and your small job, need our help. It was charity. I looked at the check, at my father's signature on the bottom. I saw Charlie's smug little smile, and David's look of magnanimous pity. In their world of 6-figure bonuses and political fundraising, this was pocket change. To me, it was a declaration of my perceived incompetence. I folded the check and put it in my purse, my throat tight. Thank you, I murmured. That's very thoughtful. But what I thought was, one day, you'll see. It was a hopeless, silent cry into the void. I had no idea how soon, and how terribly, that day would come. The contrast between my family's perception of me and the reality of my life was a canyon. They refused to even look across. The Monday after that disastrous dinner, I was back in my own world, a world where I was not small. The door to my kindergarten classroom was a portal into a universe that ran on its own logic, its own rhythms of chaos and discovery. The room smelled of tempera paint, disinfectant wipes, and that faint, sweet scent of childhood. It was my command post, and I knew its every corner. That morning, a little boy named Leo was having a hard time. His parents were divorcing, and he brought his storm of sadness and anger into our bright, colorful room. He'd knocked over a tower of blocks built by another child and was now huddled under the reading table, refusing to come out, his small body shaking with sobs. Some might see a disruption, a problem to be managed. I saw a casualty, a small human in need of a medic for his heart. I didn't loom over him. I didn't command him to come out. I got down on the floor, crawling on my hands and knees until I was at eye level with the underside of the table. I didn't say anything at first. I just sat there with him, in his makeshift fortress of misery. After a minute, his sobs quieted into sniffles. "It's a good fort," I said softly. "Very strong." He peeked at me from behind his hands. Did you know that sometimes, even the strongest forts need a door, just in case you want to get some fresh air, or maybe a snack? A tiny smile flickered on his lips. I had established a rapport, found a non-threatening point of entry. It was a negotiation, no different in principle from what I was trained to do in the reserves. Find common ground, de-escalate, build trust. After a few more minutes, he crawled out, and we went to the calm-down corner together, where we looked at a picture book about a little bear who was sad. By lunchtime, he was laughing with his friends. The crisis was averted. It wasn't a corporate merger or a city budget, but to Leo, it was everything. That Saturday was my drill weekend. I traded my paint-stained apron for a crisp operational camouflage pattern uniform. The drive to the Army Reserve Center on the outskirts of the city was a transition. The suburban sprawl gave way to industrial parks, and then the gated entrance, topped with barbed wire. The moment I passed through the gate, I was no longer Miss Anna. I was Major Vance. The shift was internal, a straightening of my spine, a sharpening of my focus. My company, the 416th Civil Affairs Battalion, was gathered in the drill hall, a cavernous, echoing space that smelled of diesel fuel and floor wax. My first sergeant, a senior non-commissioned officer named Marcus Thorne, called the company to attention as I entered. "Ma'am, on deck." The sound of 60 soldiers snapping to attention was a thunderclap of respect my own family would never offer me. Sergeant First Class Thorne was a man carved from granite and experience. He'd done tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he had a gaze that could peel paint. He didn't suffer fools, and he didn't grant respect lightly. To him, my civilian job was a source of strength, not weakness. "The best CA officers are the ones who know how to talk to people, ma'am," he told me once. "Teachers, cops, social workers, they get it. The suits never do." That day, we were working on mission planning. The scenario was a catastrophic earthquake in a developing nation. Our task was to create a plan for our initial deployment, identify key civilian leaders, assess critical infrastructure needs, water, power, medical, and establish a secure base for humanitarian aid distribution. I stood in front of a massive, wall-sized map, pointing out potential routes, choke points, and resource depots. "Sergeant Miller, I want a full breakdown of all medical facilities in this sector, public and private. I don't care if it's a state-of-the-art hospital or a 2-room veterinary clinic. I want to know what's there," I ordered. "Lieutenant Davis, your team will focus on water sources, rivers, wells, municipal treatment plants. Assume they're all compromised. What's your purification plan?" The room was a hive of quiet, focused activity. My soldiers, young and old, from all walks of life, worked with a shared purpose. There was no condescension here. There was only the mission. I moved between the groups, listening, asking questions, guiding their planning. This was my element. Managing complex, interlocking systems with incomplete information under immense pressure. It was a 3-dimensional chess game, with lives at stake. My sister had her risk analysis matrix for a financial market. I had one for a shattered city. My brother had his budget for an emergency operations center. I was training to build one from the rubble. Later that evening, back at my quiet apartment, I hung my uniform carefully in the closet. I ran my hand over the fabric, the faint scent of the drill hall clinging to it. I looked at the gold oak leaf insignia on the collar, the symbol of my rank, Major. It felt more real, more earned than any other title I had. I took the check from my purse, the one my family had given me. "For your little classroom." I looked at it for a long time, the insult burning fresh. Then I put it in my desk drawer. I wouldn't cash it for a spa day. I'd use it to buy enhanced first aid kits and emergency rations for my classroom's earthquake preparedness bin. It felt like a small act of defiance, a secret I kept from them, the secret of my own competence. A week later, the earth sent a warning shot. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on the colorful rug with my students, reading a story about a very hungry caterpillar. When the ground gave a sudden violent lurch, the building groaned, The hanging paper lanterns swayed wildly. A few of the children gasped, their eyes wide with fear. For a split second, there was a frozen silence. Then my training slammed into place, overriding any personal fear. Duck and cover. My voice was loud, clear, and calm. Not the soft tones of Miss Anna, but the commanding voice of Major Vance. The children, drilled relentlessly, didn't hesitate. They scrambled under the sturdy little wooden tables, tucking their heads down and covering them with their arms. I did a quick head count with my eyes, ensuring every child was under cover, before diving under my own desk. The shaking lasted only a few seconds. A rough, unsettling jolt, and then it was over. The silence that followed was more frightening than the tremor itself. Then, a single child started to cry. I crawled out from under my desk. Okay, everyone. It's over. It was just a little earthquake. The building is strong. Our tables are strong. And you were all so brave. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. I went from table to table, my voice a soothing balm, checking on each child, offering a reassuring smile or a gentle pat on the back. The fear in the room slowly subsided, replaced by a nervous, excited chatter. We had faced the monster, and we had won. Later that evening, the tremor was the lead story on the news, and there was my brother David, standing in front of City Hall, looking impeccable. He was in his element, projecting an aura of calm control for the cameras. "I want to reassure the citizens of this great city," he said, his voice resonating with rehearsed sincerity. While today's seismic event was minor, it served as a successful test of our city's robust emergency alert systems. Our infrastructure is sound, and our first responders are the best in the nation. We have comprehensive plans in place for any contingency. Your city government is prepared. I watched him on the screen, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Robust systems, comprehensive plans. They were just words. I had felt the raw, physical power of the earth. I knew that a plan on paper is not the same as a plan executed in the heart of chaos. While he was talking, my phone buzzed. A text from Charlie in the family group chat. "Did you feel that? Hope it didn't rattle your construction paper. Just confirmed with IT. Our server building's seismic dampeners didn't even register a flutter. Engineered to last." The casual biting dismissal in the face of a real threat was too much. I had to try. I called David. He answered on the second ring. His voice rushed. "Anna can't talk." In the middle of a media briefing. "David, I just have a quick question about the city plan," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "The rally points for school evacuations, have they been physically inspected recently? And what about the communication protocols for when the cell network goes down? The standard satellite phones might be overwhelmed." There was a pause. I could hear the muffled sounds of reporters in the background. Then David sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "Anna, please. I have professionals, experts, who handle this. We have it covered. Every is dotted, every is crossed." "But David, in a real quake, the plan is just the starting point. The chaos—" He cut me off, his patience gone. "Listen," he said, his voice dropping to a low, frustrated whisper. "I appreciate your enthusiasm. I really do. But this is the big leagues. Leave the big stuff to us, okay? You just focus on your world. Make sure you have enough glitter and glue sticks for your kids." He hung up. I stood in my silent apartment, the phone still pressed to my ear. Glitter and glue sticks. It was the distillation of everything they thought of me. I was the keeper of trivial things, the mistress of the inconsequential. The deep, primal tremor I had felt in the earth was matched by a tremor of rage and helplessness inside me. They were so confident, so certain in their systems and their status. They were standing on the edge of a cliff, admiring the view, and had no idea the ground beneath their feet was about to crumble into dust. The day the world broke was a Saturday. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the air held the first crisp promise of autumn. I was treating myself to a rare morning out, sitting in a small cafe in the city's historic district. The area was beautiful. a collection of old brick buildings, charming boutiques, and cobblestone alleys. It was also a seismic death trap. I was stirring my latte, reading a book, feeling a sense of peace that had been absent all week. That peace was a fragile, paper-thin illusion. It began not with a jolt, but with a deep, subterranean roar, a sound that seemed to come from the very core of the planet. It was a bass note that vibrated through the soles of my shoes, through the chair, into my bones. Before my brain could even process the sound, the first violent wave hit. The floor didn't shake, it whipped sideways. My latte flew from the table, spattering across the wall. The cafe's large plate glass window didn't just crack, it exploded inward in a shower of glittering shrapnel. Instinct, hammered into me through years of training, took over. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze. I moved. Get down, I bellowed, my voice cutting through the rising chorus of shrieks. I dove, not under my flimsy table, but into the sturdy doorframe of the kitchen, pulling the terrified teenage barista down with me. Cover your head. The world became a symphony of destruction. The grinding, tearing sound of brick and mortar giving way. The high-pitched scream of twisting metal. The sickening crunch of collapsing structures. The ground was a living thing, a furious beast trying to throw us off its back. It felt like being inside a giant tin can, being shaken by a god. I pressed myself against the doorframe, shielding the young barista with my body as plaster and dust rained down on us. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 90 seconds. When the shaking finally stopped, the silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. It was a dead, profound silence, punctuated by the faint, distant sound of a single car alarm and the soft patter of falling dust. The air was thick, choked with a gray powder that burned my lungs. I pushed myself up, my ears ringing. The front of the cafe was gone. Where the window and door had been, there was now a jagged pile of bricks and splintered wood. The sky beyond was hazed with a thick, roiling cloud of dust. I could hear moans from inside the cafe. My mind went into triage mode. Assess, prioritize, act. I helped the shaking barista to her feet. Are you hurt? She shook her head, her eyes wide with shock. Good. Stay here. Help anyone who can walk. I moved through the wreckage. An elderly man was trapped under a heavy wooden table, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. A woman had a deep gash on her forehead, blood streaming down her face. I did what I could. I used tablecloths for bandages, and a man's belt for a tourniquet. I directed the few able-bodied survivors, my voice calm and authoritative. You find water. You help me lift this. They responded without question, grateful for a voice of command in the suffocating chaos. These were my first orders in the broken world. Small commands to save a handful of lives in a ruined cafe. I didn't know yet that the scale of my responsibility was about to grow exponentially. After stabilizing the injured as best I could, I knew I had to move. I had to get to a place of authority, a place where information might be gathering. My training provided a clear objective: the city's Emergency Operations Center, which I knew was located in a reinforced annex of City Hall. That was where the leadership should be. That was where my brother David would be. Climbing out of the cafe was like stepping onto a different planet. The charming historic street was a war zone. Buildings had slumped into the road. Cars lay crushed under tons of fallen masonry. A water main had burst, and a geyser of brown water was shooting into the air. The dust was so thick, it was like a dense fog, turning the bright morning into a sepulchral twilight. The sounds were a tapestry of horror: the cries of the injured, the frantic shouts of people searching for loved ones, the ominous creak and groan of damaged buildings settling. There were no sirens, no organized response, just pockets of dazed, terrified people wandering through the ruins. The city's robust systems had evaporated. The journey to City Hall, normally a 10-minute walk, took me nearly an hour. Every block presented a new horror, a new obstacle. I navigated around downed power lines that hissed and sparked ominously. I helped a frantic mother find her lost child. I used a tire iron from a wrecked car to pry open a jammed door to free a trapped family. With every step, the scale of the devastation became more overwhelming. My heart ached for the city, for the people, but my mind remained cold, analytical. This is the operating environment. Adapt, overcome. As I got closer to the city center, the chaos coalesced. People were streaming toward City Hall, drawn by the same instinct I had. It was a symbol of power, of safety, but the symbol was a lie. The Grand Plaza in front of the building was a refugee camp of the terrified. The building itself was damaged. A huge crack ran up its marble facade, and several of the great columns had crumbled. I saw a handful of police officers and a couple of firefighters trying to maintain some semblance of order, but they were leaderless. Their own command structures obviously shattered. They were just men in uniforms, as lost as everyone else. And then I saw him. My brother, David. He was standing on the steps of the broken building, his immaculate suit now covered in dust, his hair disheveled. He was shouting, trying to give orders, but his voice was thin, lost in the sea of panicked noise. People, please. We need to remain calm. We need to clear the area. No one was listening. They were a mob, driven by fear, and his political platitudes were meaningless. He was a man whose only tool was a microphone, and the power was out. His smooth, confident facade had been sandblasted away, revealing the terrified, ineffectual man beneath. A moment later, I saw Charlie. She was pushing her way through the crowd, her face a mask of frantic fury. He must have been nearby when it hit. She spotted David and clawed her way to the steps. David, what the hell is going on? Where is the response? I've been trying to call my office. My people are trapped in the Athelred Tower. You have to send someone, she shrieked, grabbing his arm. I don't know, he yelled back, his voice cracking. All comms are down. I can't reach anyone. What do you mean you can't reach anyone? Charlie's voice was incredulous. You're the city council. You're in charge. It was a pathetic, terrifying tableau. The CEO who could manage a global company from Zurich was helpless. The councilman who bragged about his state-of-the-art emergency plan was impotent. They stood on the steps of their broken kingdom, utterly lost. They didn't even see me at first, as I pushed my way through the crowd toward a damaged police cruiser near the steps. Its lights were still flashing feebly. The door was unlocked. The radio might work. The key was in the ignition. The battery still alive. I slid into the driver's seat and grabbed the radio handset. I switched to the primary emergency broadcast channel. Static. I tried the state police frequency. Static. The National Guard channel. More static. I ran through every emergency frequency I had memorized. Nothing. A cold, heavy certainty settled in my gut. We were completely, utterly alone. The system hadn't just bent. It had shattered. There was no top-down response coming. There was only us. I got out of the car and looked at the scene. The scattered first responders, the overwhelmed politicians, the terrified civilians. They were all looking for one thing, someone to tell them what to do. My entire life, my family had defined me by what I was not. I was not a CEO. I was not a politician. I was not important. But in that moment, what I was became the only thing on earth that mattered. I took a deep breath, the dust rasping in my throat, and walked toward the small group of police and firefighters. I stood before the highest-ranking man among them, a police sergeant with gray hair and haunted eyes. "Sergeant," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Major Anna Vance, United States Army. What's your status?" He blinked, looking me up and down. I was a woman in civilian clothes, covered in dust, but my bearing was unmistakable. "Major, comms are out. All of them. We've got reports of multiple collapse structures. Fires. We're blind, ma'am. No leadership." I nodded. This was it, the moment of truth. In a catastrophic loss of civilian command and control, I began, my voice projecting so that the other first responders, and more importantly, my siblings could hear. And for the immediate preservation of human life, Military authority can be temporarily established. As the senior military officer on site, I am assuming operational command. This disaster response, until relieved by a competent authority. My words hung in the stunned air. David and Charlie stared at me, their mouths literally hanging open. It was as if their pet hamster had suddenly started quoting Shakespeare. The police sergeant looked uncertain for a second. Then he saw the certainty in my eyes. He saw the shadow of command. As if on cue, a figure emerged from the dust-choked street. A large man in civilian clothes. But he moved with a purpose that was anything but civilian. He was covered in grime, a cut on his cheek, but his eyes were sharp. He saw me, and his gaze locked onto mine. His posture changed instantly. He straightened his back, brought his heels together, and rendered a perfect, crisp salute. It was Sergeant First Class Marcus Thorne, my first sergeant. He lived only a few blocks away. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble of absolute confidence. "Sergeant First Class Thorne reporting. The 416th Armory is 5 miles from here. Structure seems stable, but the roads are impassable. What are your orders?" That salute, that simple, disciplined gesture. It was a thunderclap in the silence of chaos. It was the seal of legitimacy. To the stunned police officers and firefighters, it was a signal they understood. Here was a real chain of command. To my brother and sister, it was an earth-shattering impossibility. Their little sister, the kindergarten teacher, was being saluted by this formidable man. She was giving orders. She was in charge. The world they knew had not just been shaken. It had been turned completely upside down. The first few hours were a controlled blur of activity. My mind, trained for this exact scenario, operated with a chilling clarity. The panic and despair of the crowd were variables to be managed, not emotions to be shared. My first priority was to create order from the chaos. "Sergeant Thorne," I said, is my voice, cutting through the stunned silence that still held my siblings captive. "And find me the most structurally sound building in this plaza. Not City Hall. Something low, with good visibility and multiple points of entry and exit. And that's our command post. And get me a runner team. I need young, fast volunteers who can carry messages." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, and moved off with an efficiency that was beautiful to watch. He began barking orders, and people, desperate for direction, began to move. I turned to the police sergeant. "Sergeant, I need you to establish a security perimeter. Use your officers to cordon off the most dangerous, unstable buildings. And I need a casualty collection point. A safe, open area where we can bring the wounded." "Yes, ma'am," he said. The man coming more easily now. He, too, began to organize his people. I saw my brother David finally snap out of his stupor. He took a step toward me, his politician's mask trying to reassemble itself on his face. "Anna, wait a minute. You can't just, who do you think you are? I'm a city councilman. This is my jurisdiction." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I looked him dead in the eye. "Your jurisdiction ceased to exist the moment the 911 system went silent. Right now, there is no city council. There are only survivors, and unless you have a better plan for keeping them alive, you will follow my orders." My gaze was flat, hard, and unwavering. I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Not of the earthquake, but of me. Just then, a frantic woman ran up to the police sergeant, screaming. "The hospital, St. James Hospital, part of the West Wing, collapsed. My husband's a doctor in there. They're trapped. There are patients, nurses, they're trapped." Almost simultaneously, a man in a dust-covered business suit stumbled toward Charlie. "Miss Vance, thank God, it's the Athelred Tower. The top floors are unstable. There was a fire. We have dozens of people trapped up there. The emergency stairs are blocked." Charlie whirled on me, her own panic now channeled into righteous fury. "Did you hear that? My building, my employees. You have to send your people there. Now." This was the first great test, the first life-or-death decision. Sergeant Thorne had returned with a piece of cardboard on which he'd already begun to sketch a rough map of the downtown area based on runner reports. I took it from him. 2 major sites of mass casualties, limited resources. We had maybe a dozen able-bodied first responders and a handful of volunteers who were strong enough to move rubble. We could only focus on one major rescue operation, not both. I looked at the map. St. James Hospital, the Athelred Tower. My mind did the cold, brutal calculus of command. The hospital held doctors, nurses, medical supplies, blood, medicine. Every person we saved from there was not just a life saved, but a force multiplier. A rescued doctor could save 10 more lives. A salvaged bag of IV fluid could keep a dozen people from dying of dehydration. The Athelred Tower, my sister's gleaming monument to her own success, was full of accountants and marketing executives. Valuable people, yes, but not assets in a mass casualty event. The rescue at the hospital would be more complex, more dangerous. The building was older, the collapse more severe, but the potential return on investment, measured in human lives, was infinitely higher. The hospital, I said, my voice final. We're going to the hospital. What? The shriek came from Charlie. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated outrage. Are you insane? My tower is a modern building. It's an easier rescue. There are important people there. My people. She's right, Anna. David chimed in, finding his voice again. He was trying to appeal to me, to find the little sister he thought he knew. The tower is a symbol of the city's economy. Rescuing them would be a huge morale boost. When he called, it's the logical choice, politically. The air grew thick with tension. The volunteers, the cops, the firefighters, they all stopped what they were doing. Watching this family drama play out at the epicenter of the apocalypse. This was my moment of crisis, my command being challenged by the 2 people who had never believed I was capable of commanding anything. I turned to face them, letting the full weight of my authority settle on my shoulders. I was no longer their sister. I was the incident commander. My voice was devoid of all emotion, as cold and sharp as surgical steel. Your people, Charlie, are no more or less important than the grandmother in Ward C or the newborn in the NICU. And your politics, David, died an hour ago, along with the power grid. We are not making decisions based on morale or symbolism. We are making them based on a single brutal metric: how to save the most lives possible. I turned my back on them, addressing Sergeant Thorne. Sergeant, assemble a primary rescue team. I want every firefighter we have, plus 10 volunteers. Take saws, crowbars, anything we can use for breaching. Clear a path to St. James. The rest of the volunteers will form secondary teams to shuttle any retrieved supplies back to our collection point. Move, now. Thorne didn't hesitate. Yes, ma'am. He began calling out names, and the rescue team formed up, a small beacon of purpose in the vast despair. I then turned back to my siblings. They were standing there, frozen in disbelief and rage. I looked at David. Councilman, I said, using the formal title as a weapon. Your political skills are now a resource. You will take charge of the civilians here in the plaza. Organize them into work details. Water-carrying teams, first aid assistants, rubble clearing. Create a system. Keep them busy. Keep them from panicking. That is your assignment. Then, I looked at my sister, the mighty CEO. Miss Vance, I said, my voice just as formal, just as cold. You are an expert in logistics. At our casualty collection point, we will have a constant influx of wounded, and we will soon have retrieved medical supplies. You will establish and manage a system of inventory and distribution. You will track every bandage, every bottle of antiseptic. You will make sure the right supplies get to the right people. That is your job. I stared at them, my expression unreadable. You have your orders. Do you understand them? Charlie's face was a storm of conflicting emotions. Her fury was at war with a dawning, terrifying understanding. She, a captain of industry, was being told to count bandages by her part-time soldier sister. David looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He was being tasked with managing a crowd, not from a podium, but from the dirt. his authority granted to him by the very person whose authority he had just challenged. For a long stretched moment, nobody moved. The entire plaza seemed to be holding its breath. Charlie opened her mouth to argue, her pride fighting a losing battle against the sheer, undeniable force of my command. She looked into my eyes and saw not her little sister Anna, but Major Vance. She saw a commander who had just sent men and women on a life-or-death mission and would not tolerate insubordination. Her mouth closed. She gave a short, jerky nod. David, looking utterly defeated, simply whispered, "I understand." I gave them both one last, hard look. "Then get to it." I turned and walked toward the command post. Sergeant Thorne had established in a small one-story bank building that had survived the quake. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. I had just declared war on a disaster, and I had just demoted my own family to field lieutenants. The battle for the city had begun. The next 36 hours were a descent into a waking nightmare, a marathon of impossible choices and small, desperate victories. The world shrank to the confines of our makeshift command post, the lobby of the regional bank, and the few blocks around it that we could control. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only the rhythm of the crisis, the ebb and flow of tragedy and hope. I commanded from a salvage desk, with Sergeant Thorne as my right hand. Our map, the piece of cardboard, became our sacred text, constantly updated by the runner teams who were my eyes and ears. Every report was a fresh wound: a fire in the garment district, a suspected gas leak near the courthouse, a group of elderly people trapped in a collapsed nursing home. I had to prioritize, to triage the suffering of an entire city. Each decision was a weight, a life or a dozen lives placed on a scale. Send a team to the nursing home, and the fire in the garment district spreads. Try to contain the fire, and the old people might not last. It was a God's eye view of hell, and I was the one forced to play God. The rescue at the hospital was a grueling, heroic slog. The team, led by a fire captain who had wordlessly accepted my authority, worked with a grim, focused intensity. They sent back runners with updates. "We've breached the first floor, multiple casualties, but the pharmacy is accessible. Dr. Evans is alive. He's setting up a triage in the lobby. We've found the blood bank. It's intact." Each message was a small miracle, a payload of hope delivered through the ruins. I saw my siblings only in passing, two more figures moving through the dust and chaos. But I watched them. David, the polished councilman, was transformed. His suit was torn, his face was smudged with dirt, and his hands were raw and bleeding. But he had found a new kind of purpose. I saw him calming a hysterical mother, then turning to organize a line of people to clear a path for the wounded. He wasn't giving speeches. He was working. He was leading not with rhetoric, but with action. He was using his innate ability to organize and persuade, not for political gain, but for survival. For the first time in his life, he was getting his hands dirty, and in the grime, he was finding a sliver of honor. Charlie's transformation was even more profound. The imperious CEO was gone. She was on her knees in the casualty collection point, which had been set up in the plaza's open-air amphitheater. Her sharp suit was ruined. She had a list scrawled on the back of a bank deposit slip, her manicured nails chipped and broken. She was, as ordered, managing the logistics of our fledgling medical system. When a runner brought in a box of salvaged saline bags, she didn't delegate. She signed for it herself, her handwriting sharp and precise. "Okay, this goes to Station 3. She'd snap. "They have 3 severe dehydration cases." She was using her brilliant, ruthless efficiency, not to increase a stock price, but to shepherd a dwindling pile of bandages and antiseptic wipes. I saw a moment when a young woman, her leg crudely splinted, began to weep with gratitude after Charlie gave her 2 precious ibuprofen tablets. Charlie looked at the woman, her face blank with a kind of shock, as if she had never before witnessed the direct, human consequence of her own actions. There were moments of despair. A runner returned with the news that we were too late for the nursing home. A section of the hospital we thought was stable collapsed further, killing a brave volunteer. In those moments, I would feel the immense weight of command threaten to crush me. I would retreat to a corner of the bank, my hands shaking, and allow myself 60 seconds. 60 seconds of grief, of fear, of doubt. Then I would push it all down, lock it away in a cold, dark box in my mind, and step back out into the lobby. The commander could not afford to break. It was near dawn on the second day. I hadn't slept. My voice was a raw rasp. My body ached with a fatigue so deep, it felt like it had settled in my bones. We had just received word that the last of the survivors had been pulled from the hospital wreckage. We had saved over 60 people, including 4 doctors and 7 nurses. We had also salvaged enough medical supplies to keep hundreds more alive. It was a victory, but a bloody, costly one. I was standing over the map, planning our next move, a systematic, block-by-block search and rescue operation, when a new sound cut through the air. It was a faint, crackling hiss. It came from the police cruiser's radio, which a volunteer had managed to power with a car battery. Sergeant Thorne and I exchanged a look and sprinted out to the car. I grabbed the handset. This is the downtown emergency command post, I said. My voice hoarse. Is anyone there? Over. The static hissed and popped. Then a voice, clear and professional, broke through. Downtown command. This is Major General Davies, California National Guard. We are at a staging area, 10 miles west of the city. We read you. Faint, but clear. Identify yourself. Over. The relief that washed over me was so powerful, my knees almost buckled. We weren't alone anymore. I took a breath, my training snapping back into place. I was no longer just a survivor. I was an officer reporting to a superior. Major General Davies, this is Major Anna Vance, Army Reserve. I am the acting incident commander. Sir, the city has suffered a catastrophic seismic event. Central command structures have failed. We have established a command post and casualty collection point at City Hall Plaza. We have multiple structural collapses, fires, and an unknown number of casualties. We have organized civilian and first responder teams and have conducted a successful primary rescue operation at St. James Hospital. We are currently preparing for secondary search and rescue operations. We are in critical need of heavy moving equipment, medical support, and communications gear. Over. I delivered the situation report, the site rep, concisely, professionally, hitting all the key points. There was a pause on the other end, and for a terrifying second, I thought I had lost the signal. Then the general's voice came back, and it was filled with a tone I had never in my life heard from an authority figure. Profound respect. Major Vance, good God, son. You've established command from the inside. Alone? Not alone, sir, I said, my eyes finding Sergeant Thorne, who stood grimly by the car. I have good people. Understood, Major. You've done a hell of a job. You've saved hundreds of lives. Your actions have been extraordinary. Now you hold the line. We are mounting a full-scale insertion. Air assets will be overhead within the hour. Ground convoy, with engineering and medical support, will reach you by 1200 hours. Hold the line, Major. Help is on the way. Roger that, sir. Holding the line. Vance out. I placed the handset back in its cradle, my hand trembling slightly. It was over. My command was over. I wasn't aware that my siblings had been standing nearby, drawn by the sound of the radio. They had heard the whole thing. They had heard the general's words. A hell of a job. Extraordinary. You've saved hundreds of lives. They stood there, covered in the dirt and grime of the past 2 days, and stared at me. The condescension, the pity, the arrogance, it was all gone, burned away by the fire of the crisis. In its place was a raw, gaping awe. They weren't looking at their quirky little sister anymore. They were looking at a stranger, a commander, a woman who had held a city's life in her hands, and had not faltered. The ground had stopped shaking, but their entire world was still tilting on its axis. The arrival of the National Guard was like watching the gods descend from Olympus. The thumping rhythm of Black Hawk helicopters, beating the dusty air, was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Soldiers in clean uniforms, rappelled down into the plaza, bringing with them order, resources, and overwhelming force. The convoy of massive trucks that rolled in a few hours later, filled with engineers, medics, and supplies, felt like the arrival of civilization itself. My formal transfer of command to Major General Davies was a brief professional affair. We stood in the middle of the plaza, our tattered cardboard map laid out on the hood of a Humvee. I gave him a final, detailed briefing. He was a tall, lean man, with kind eyes, but a gaze that missed nothing. When I was finished, he didn't shake my hand. He saluted me. "Major Vance," he said, his voice quiet, but firm enough for those nearby to hear. "In 30 years of service, I have never seen anything like this. What you did here, it will be studied at the War College. You held this city together, with nothing but guts and leadership. The state and the nation owe you a debt of gratitude." He asked me to stay on as his liaison, to be the bridge between his military operation and the civilian survivors I now knew so intimately. I accepted. As the general moved off to give orders to his own staff, my siblings approached me. They walked slowly, hesitantly, as if I were a strange, unpredictable animal. The familiar swagger was gone from David's walk. The sharp, impatient energy had drained from Charlie. They just looked small, exhausted. It was David who spoke first. His voice was husky, broken. "Anna," he stopped, swallowing hard. He couldn't seem to find the words. He just shook his head, looking at the ground, then back at me. I had no idea. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was a confession of a lifetime of willful blindness. Charlie was silent. She, the woman who always had an answer, whose words were her weapons, was utterly speechless. She just stared at me, her eyes tracing the lines of fatigue on my face, the grime under my fingernails, the commander's authority that now clung to me like a second skin. Finally, she managed a single whispered phrase, "Thank you. It was for everything. For saving her people in the tower, even though I chose the hospital first. For saving her, for saving us." I just nodded, too tired to offer absolution or recrimination. The truth was, their validation, the thing I had craved for so long, felt strangely hollow. It was like being given a trophy for a race I had already won days ago. The real prize wasn't their newfound respect. It was the quiet, unshakable knowledge in my own heart. I knew what I was capable of. The respect was just an echo. I had already heard the thunder. 3 months later, the city was a patchwork of reconstruction and memory. The sound of heavy machinery had replaced the sirens, a noise of healing. The scars on the landscape were still visible, but so were the signs of resilience. Life was returning. I was back in my classroom. It had been relocated to a temporary building, a sterile prefabricated unit, but we had filled it with color and life. I was sitting in my rocking chair, reading a story to a new group of 5-year-olds. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes, dancing in the air. In the middle of the story, I paused. I looked at their innocent, upturned faces, and my heart swelled with a fierce, protective love. This was my other battlefield. This was the peace we had fought for. The army had awarded me the Soldier's Medal for heroism in a non-combat situation. There had been a ceremony, handshakes, and a speech by General Davies. My family was there, sitting in the front row, looking on with a quiet, stunned reverence. The local news had called me the Angel of the Plaza, but I had politely declined all further interviews. My 15 minutes of fame felt like a distraction. The work was what mattered. The work of rebuilding. The work of teaching. My relationship with Charlie and David had been fundamentally, irrevocably altered. The condescension was gone, replaced by a tentative, almost fearful deference. They called me. They asked for my opinion on things. Charlie was redesigning her company's entire crisis protocol and asked me to review it. David, who was now leading the city council's rebuilding committee, consulted me on the placement of new long-term shelters. They treated me like an oracle, a source of profound wisdom. One evening, David mentioned the check, the $500 pity check from before the quake. "Whatever happened with that?" he asked. A flush of shame coloring his cheeks. I cashed it, I told him simply. I bought new emergency supply kits for my classroom, trauma dressings, water purification tablets, emergency rations. We used them to help the people from the cafe on the first day. The silence that followed that revelation was heavier than any building that had fallen. We had a family dinner last week, our first since the quake. It was at a simple restaurant, one that had managed to reopen. The dynamic was completely different. They didn't hold court. They listened. They asked me about my day, about my little ones. But the question was different now. It was filled with genuine interest, with an understanding that my world of glitter and glue sticks was just as vital as theirs. They had seen the steel beneath the softness. They had learned that the hand that can gently guide a child's crayon is the same hand that can point to a map and send people into the breach. The vindication I felt wasn't a spike of triumph. It was a deep, quiet calm. I didn't need them to see me anymore, because I finally, fully, saw myself. My worth wasn't something they could grant or withhold with a condescending remark or a pitying check. It was forged in the chaos, proven in the fire, and it was mine alone. I was Major Anna Vance. I was Miss Anna. I was not a part-timer in my own life. I was whole. The greatest lesson I learned from the rubble of my city is that your value is not a reflection in someone else's eyes. It is a fire you build within yourself. For years, I let my family's perception define me. I let their dismissal of my choices make me feel small. But when everything else was stripped away, the only thing that mattered was what I could do, not what they thought of me. Being underestimated can be a painful burden, but it can also be a hidden superpower. While they were busy looking down on me, I was busy becoming the person they would one day have to look up to. I want to open it up to you all now. Share your own story in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated or had a part of your life dismissed by others, only to have it become your greatest strength? Reading your stories is what builds this incredible community, so please don't be shy. If my story resonated with you today, don't forget to like this video so more people can find it. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding strength in the most unexpected places. Thank you so much for joining me and for listening to my journey. I hope it inspires you to recognize the commander that lives inside of you, and I wish you all the strength and peace in the world.